Good morning, everybody, and welcome back. And I say that with a lot of authority here because we're back. It's Dave and Joel from Win Daily Sports, and it's college football. It's week 11. There's so much good game, or so many good games going on in the DFS slate, but so many good to watch too that affect the college football playoffs. We've been off for 2 weeks trying to take care of a few things back home, but we're so pumped. We're so excited, and we'll talk about it more coming out of the intro. I hope you missed us because, Joel, I missed you. I mean, I've had a few decent weeks recently, but I need a little bit of that juju we have going on to really hit one today. How about you?
I agree. It's been a couple weeks. I'm excited to be back. Welcome back. Big show this week. Fun week to get into things. A big slate. There's some exciting games, but there's a couple good games to target for DFS. As always, keep your eyes and ears open for injury updates as they come in before games kick off, but I'm excited to break it down. I think there's some really good spots to target today.
Great spots. I've been playing all week. I mean, there's been some interesting things. Last night was almost a 4 running back slate you had to have to win last night. No 2 quarterbacks, not one in the super flex. There's just been some different ways to attack college football, but looking at today with 12 games, looking at 3 with totals over 60, it's definitely a 2 quarterback slate for me. There's definitely some games to attack. I think we're back to our major strategy of how we align things, and I'm so excited to see Warren checking in already. He's always got some great insights. What's up, Warren? And Adam Cease. Hey, Adam, let me tell you something. My son, he's 12, got to go to Penn State, Ohio State last week, left me at home. I know you're a big Penn State guy, and it was disappointing, but how do these 12-year-olds get to go to big things before me? But anyway, good to hear from you, Adam. Yeah, Joel, I mean, when you look at the slate at first, I mean, the games that pop are obviously Miami, Georgia Tech. 10-point spread, not bad. Right in that kind of, we want to be right around there because that means we can play about through all 4 quarters at 63.5, 65.5 in Army, North Texas, and a 5.5 spread. So real nice pocket there. And then obviously the cream of the crop. Colorado, Texas Tech later, the 4:00 game, 62.5, 4.5 point spread. But Texas Tech, it's just a matchup of great versus bad in the certain strength areas. So I know there's other games we'll talk about, but anything else pop, before we get into the games?
Well, the one thing I think would be really interesting for today that everyone should keep their eye on is there's a few guys that are priced up. And I normally would say when guys are really priced up, you can probably find a better spot at a just cheaper discount. You don't pay too much for one guy in college football. But this week, there's a few obvious spots where guys are priced up. You're just going to have to play some of these expensive guys. It just seems like, there's like 4 or 5 guys priced over 8,500 that are just in too good a spots to fade. And so you're going to have to find some value. So it does feel a lot like a stars and scrubs type approach today. But you got to be right? You can't miss. You got to be right on which ones those are. So I'll pull up my screen. Let's go through each game, break it down, and find those spots and who we like and who we're going to be rolling out today. Starting with Florida and Texas, who is an intriguing first matchup to break down with you guys because Texas, for the most part, has been a disappointment on offense this year. Haven't been quite as explosive as we were anticipating. Florida, not a great defense. They can definitely be beaten. It seems like a good spot, especially as some of these Texas guys are underpriced. They haven't adjusted their pricing based on the usage. Wisner has been the go-to running back. He had 17 carries last week at only 5K against a beatable Florida squad. That seems too low. Now, that means he's going to come with ownership. And the issue with Wisner is while he is the lead back, Blue is still involved. He's not going to get every carry. If he doesn't get that 100-yard bonus, he doesn't necessarily get there. And the only reason I'm saying it that way is because if you're playing cash games or smaller tournaments, I think Wisner's a pretty safe play. But if you're looking at a GPP at the ownership he's going to carry, you almost have to look for a reason not to play him. And I would tell you, if he doesn't reach 100 yards, he probably doesn't need to be played.
No, I think you're right. I'm looking at this game. Florida's in a tough spot. I mean, they did kind of give a thumbs up approval for their head coach, which I thought was a little bit odd this time in the season. I mean, I guess they're almost throwing up the white flag knowing that they're about to drop under 500 going into today. I mean, big spread, 21.5. Texas team total, 34.5. You're right, Joel. I mean, you would think, in a perfect world, Texas would have been a more explosive offense. But Weiser just seems like probably the most efficient play on this slate. Blue going in, we thought we had him, down in to be one of the, lead workhorses. And he's just his fumble issues and some other things going on. Weisner's taking over, especially in the receiving game. He's been just electric. But where I'm torn is this Texas receiving game, because I've loved Wingo. He won't get priced up at 3,200, but only has seen a few good games. But more recently has been a lot better. And I think, if we're going to go anywhere, Moore's recent game of 27.7 DK points at 4,100 could be an interesting play.
I totally agree. You're right. You can find a big spot in this passing game. The other guy I'm intrigued by is the tight end, Gunnar Helm at 3,200.
Yeah.
He's leading target getters, very cheap, almost minimum priced. If you're going to be doing this stars and scrubs approach and trying to cram in some of these high priced guys, you can fit Helm in. He doesn't even need to get you 20 points, right? If he gets you 50 yards on a score, at 3,200, that will pay off. Yeah,
and I'll just give a couple numbers. Florida 90th against the run, 162 yards a game. So I do think you have to attack them there. In the air, 219.4, they're 70th. Where we don't want to attack, Texas, great defense, number one overall against the pass. I think it's going to be hard to find anything valuable on the Florida side. So I would, if I'm playing a little bit of this game, I'd pick one or the other. I'd pick, let's say I want to go after the running game. I'd leave the passing game alone. I don't think you're going to get explosiveness. You got to pick one of the passing game or the running game, and where you want to attack with Texas, in my opinion.
I'm agree. I'm one, getting some exposure to Texas, but I will not be playing Florida players in this game either. All right, West Virginia, Cincinnati. It's interesting, thinking about these two teams on paper, how they've played all year. You would think this would be a spot we'd want to heavily attack. I'm going to play some guys in this spot, but this won't be my targeted game or my featured game, mainly because it's a lot of the work is spread out between these two teams, right? And, early in the year, we were all over Xavier Henderson. They were throwing him every time. That has kind of slowed down. He hasn't been receiving quite as many of the majority target shares he was receiving earlier in the year. So, you can pick your spots here. For me, the most interesting play is going to be the second receiver at Cincinnati, Tony Johnson, who's had an uptick in usage recently. If you look at the last 3 weeks, they've really gotten him more involved. And because of how I'm playing this week, really trying to cram in a few of these top-tier guys, you're going to need to do stars and scrubs, have a few players in the 3K range. I think as a value play, Tony Johnson might be lower owned than some of the other guys. I think he has some good upside in what should against a West Virginia pass defense that is, not so strong.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I mean, the big news coming out of West Virginia of late, Garrett Green out, one of our favorites to attack. And, Marchial, if I'm saying it right, came in last week, had a good game against Arizona, led them to a win. Interesting. He had 11 rushing attempts. He is a runner similar to Garrett Green. So I could find some value there at 6,800. But my bigger play, I really like Sorsby. I like Sorsby a lot. West Virginia, 114th out of 133 teams against the pass. We know they're terrible. I think Sorsby also provides you a little bit of running upside. Not a ton, but, there's weeks he's been 9 attempts the last 3 weeks. He had one game where he ran for 52 yards. His floor has only been – he had a bad game against Miami at Ohio at 12 or 13 points. But other than that, he's been above 20 every game and over 32 of the games, upwards of 40 versus Texas Tech. I think Sorsby is one of my favorite quarterbacks on the board. 7,900. Again, a little pricey, but not a ton. I think you're getting some value there. So for me, I like the passing game of Cincinnati here. I like Xavier Henderson. I like what you said with the second receiver, but more importantly, I like Sorsby.
All right. There you have it. Moving on to the Syracuse BC team. I think both of these teams are interesting in that they were a little bit better than expectation coming into the year, both offenses. I think this game has a little bit of appeal to me. Looking at McCord, 9K, I like McCord, but that's too expensive in this league to play him. So, I'll look at some of his receivers instead. Castellanos, on the other hand, at 6,600, that's underpriced. Castellanos can get you points with his legs. They don't have the most explosive receivers, but again, because he can run, you don't need him to have a 300-yard passing game to get there. At 6,600, if you're looking for a value QB, Castellanos is absolutely in play. I think this is a really good spot for LaQuint Allen on the Syracuse rushing side. 8,100, I just feel like it's a little highly priced. There's some other guys I prefer at the upper tier. But if you really like Allen, I think this is a spot where he could get there, so I wouldn't shy away from him. Where I'm most interested, though, is I'm going to start with Syracuse's tight end, Arande Gadsden. Now, he's an NFL prospect. He's going to be drafted early. He has been slow in the recent weeks. He got hurt early in the year. He's back now. Didn't get a ton of targets last week, but he played a lot. This BC team has not been great against tight ends. They've gotten beaten by tight ends. If there's a spot where they're going to feature Gadsden, this is the one. And this guy is a really good player. So I'm hoping people see his recent slowdown in production and don't play him, because I think this is a spot where he's a get right and he can have a big game at only 5K.
Yeah, I agree. It's been a while since we've been able to really deploy him. This Syracuse passing game, very good, but very well spread out. Pena's been one of the guys who's been a big recipient of that. He gets most of the targets since early on this season, but he started to slow down a little bit. So I like the chances of Gadsden as well this week. BC, they're showing 112th against pass catchers, which is great. And also in the passing game, they're 77th in the nation, 224 a game. So I think you can beat them in the air. One interesting thing for me for BC, and don't be scared of this, I like Castellanos. I'm with you. I'm kind of in on this Trayshawn Ward. He's a transfer from Florida State. Last week he had a big game. His yards per carry is close to 6, where you're looking at the old veteran there, Robichaud, is under 4. I think we're seeing a change in the guard, explosiveness. He caught 3 catches last week for 81 yards. At 4,700, I wouldn't be that scared of that 31 number against running backs, because overall Syracuse is allowing 136 yards a game, 55th in the nation, right in the middle. So Ward's one of those 4,700 guys that, if I'm going to play a little game environment, I would like to get involved with Ward and Castellanos.
Yeah, well, that's a good call with Ward. At 4,700, good value there. Certainly could be a sneaky spot in a GPP. All right, one of the games you mentioned, one of the highest totals on the slate, Miami, Georgia Tech. This Miami offense is on an absolute tear. You probably want some shares of them where you can get them. The issue is at 10-6, you got to spend a lot to get Ward in your lineup. He's proven to be worthy of the price tag. I think there's some guys that can match his production maybe for 1,000 less, which that 1,000 might be helpful in roster building. But if you're a true Miami believer, there's no reason to go away from Ward, because I think another big day is probably ahead. But looking at his receivers, Restrepo is the mainstay. He seems to have a big week every other week, so certainly look at him. But some of these value receivers, secondary guys, could have a big game, whether it's George or Horton. I might get exposure to them in my lineup as well.
Yeah, I agree. It's hard to pay 10-6. I understand he averages 34 a game, which is great. But at that point, you're getting 3X. I just talked about, Sorsby over at 7,900. I need 24 to match, what, Ward would need to get there. And I'm saving almost $3,000. So very much more attainable to get 24 against a West Virginia pass D than, Georgia Tech's not great on defense. Don't get me wrong, but they're 60th overall against the pass, right in the middle. It's not like they're letting up a ton. So I think I'm off Ward, but I like your strategy is still getting involved in some of the wide receivers here. Restrepo, the best. You can play him one off. Horton, you said George. And then I'm always a fan of Arroyo. The big thing with Arroyo is touchdown equity. He's got 5 this year. If he gets in the end zone at 3,300, we're going to be gold. So that's why I like Arroyo. But on the Georgia Tech side, it's tough, man. You got to understand, Miami's in the top 10 rush defense. So, and Georgia Tech kind of bread and butter to me is their run game. They haven't been able to get, too loose in the air this year. They have 2 really good wide receivers. I'm probably going to take a chance on Singleton or Rutherford. Just the way Miami has played this year, they've been down double digits to like 5 or 6 teams. They live on a very high wire act. I could see Georgia Tech maybe playing a little back and forth with them. So I'm more involved in the Georgia Tech passing game today to try and keep up with Miami, and that's Singleton and Rutherford.
Yeah, they've both been good. I feel like they're both underpriced here, so I think it's a good spot for one of them to have a ceiling game and pay off that price tag.
Yeah, agreed. And it's just tricky with Georgia Tech because we got a questionable tag on King. Looks like he's going to play. He's obviously the better passer of the group, but hopefully he does. He's 8 TDs, 1 interception. But yeah, Warren writes it. Yeah, we got to watch out for the King news. That's the big deal. I agree. So I think he plays. I do. I think just is the way this is shaping up, but we'll see.
If King doesn't play, I probably will go away from the passing game. Just it seems too questionable. Right? If King plays, I'm less interested in King and more interested in the receivers.
Yeah, agreed. Pyron this year, 2 TDs, 3 interceptions. Completion percentage, just around 50%. No thanks.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. All right. Rutgers, Minnesota. Rutgers defense is bad. They are not good.
Crazy.
It's a great spot for Minnesota. The obvious play is Darius Taylor. He's their guy. He's the NFL player. He's a star. They throw him the ball. They give him the ball on the ground. Rutgers can't stop a nosebleed at 8,700. When I keep saying there's some obvious spots I want to pay up for. Darius Taylor is one of those guys that I just want to find ways to get in my lineup. My biggest concern with Taylor is just getting out of hand too early and him not playing 4 quarters. But in terms of Minnesota, I think they're going to handle them, and I think Taylor is going to have a pretty big game here. But I think this Minnesota offense, they've shown that they can throw the ball as well. So there's other spots too. I think both Daniel Jackson and Elijah Spencer is in play. Spencer's been getting 5-6 targets each of the last few weeks at only 3,800. I think Spencer is another value play you can target. But Daniel Jackson's been the guy at 5,500. They throw him a lot. Same concern there, though, is this game gets out of hand, maybe they won't be throwing the ball all game.
Yeah, I agree. Darius Taylor's probably number 1 running back on the slate. I mean, 1 game under 10, everything else above 19 plus in the 40s and some. I still have visions of Tyree Walker running all over Rutgers, right, from Wisconsin. So even in a game that could get out of hand, Minnesota's not that type of team that really runs away and hides too easily. I think he plays at least 3 quarters here. Love Darius Taylor, number 1 running back, obviously for many reasons, but Rutgers rush defense line almost 170 a game, 94th in the nation. But one thing I'll say on Rutgers side, keep an eye on Antoine Raymond. Here's your value, $3,400 running back. Without their 2, Monagai and Brown are both out. This guy got 15 carries last week. I mean, he didn't really light it up with the yards per carry, but was able to punch one in. Looks like the only healthy running back, 14 points against USC. If you get anything near that 3,400, we're in good shape. So I like value on that side. But yeah, with you, Minnesota, Jackson, Taylor, and then Raymond on Rutgers.
All right. Another one that's going to be interesting here is this Purdue-Ohio State game. It's interesting because, again, Purdue is very bad. Ohio State's going to do whatever they want in this game. The issue is, you got to find their production, and there's almost no way they're playing 4 quarters. So, there's 4 guys that can get you there between Judkins, Henderson, Ejbuka, and Smith, and you got to hit which one is going to have the big day. But this is going to be a blowout. Ohio State's going to score a ton of points. So playing 1 or 2 of them is certainly a smart strategy, but you just got to make sure you don't miss.
Yeah, it's we're looking at team total somewhere around 6.5 for Purdue. So I'm off that, and Ohio State sitting around 44.5, 45 projected team total. So huge number, huge spread. I do like Will Howard. I think at 8,100, I think he'll play enough and put up enough points. Again, we go back to visions, right? We play this every slate, and the visions of the Notre Dame quarterback, right, off the top of my head, Riley Leonard, running all over Purdue. I mean, for I think it was 40 plus points. I think Will Howard can get his runs going today. He might not need to. He can just hand it off and never throw and they'll win. But there's just a lot of room against Purdue. So I still think Will Howard's in play. I just think you got it. Like Joel said, we're not getting 4 quarters. So you can't be too heavy on Ohio State here. I think you got to pick and choose. And for me, it would probably be Will Howard and Jeremiah Smith.
There you have it. All right. Moving over to the afternoon.
Let's answer this. What's a worthy score from Howard? I mean, ideally 25. And I think you get there.
I think that's a good over-under. He's got to get at least in the mid-20s. Anything in 22 and under, I think would be a disappointment at 8,100. If you get 25, he's getting the score. If you get your 30, he's obviously surpassing. It means he's got to hit the 300-yard bonus to get there, and he probably needs at least 2 scores to be a worthwhile play.
And I agree. I mean, he's only had 1 game under 20 this year. I mean, he's been pretty steady over that, but he's only had 2 over 30. So he's kind of like a high floor, low ceiling guy. So I don't see him getting much more than 30. But if we get 30, we're really in good shape.
Yeah, I would agree with that. All right, looking at the afternoon, this is where we get some of the more explosive games. This is, I think, where I'm going to be having a lot of my exposures in the afternoon portion of this slate, starting with what is probably my favorite spot of the day in North Texas and Army, which is interesting because usually you don't hear Army in these spots, but Army is a good football team, and they're getting their best player back this week. Daly was a surprise scratch last week. He's the quarterback in Army. He's back this week at 9,500. If you watch our show, you hear me most often say I don't like playing guys that expensive, even quarterbacks, because it's hard for them to reach their ceiling. That does not count for Brian Daly. He at 9,500. He's had those explosive days. Him getting you 40 plus isn't crazy. He does that, right? He can run for 2 or 3. He's a running back and a quarterback. And that means he's never going to give you a 300-yard bonus. He's not that type of quarterback. But the sheer fact that he can throw for 150 yards and 2 scores and run for 150 yards and 2 scores is just a ceiling that most people don't have. And then forget about the matchup. And when you look at North Texas, this team on defense is atrocious, and they have an explosive offense, which is the exact game environment you want for a college football DFS. In what should be a back and forth environment. I think Brian Daly has a ton of upside, and he is my favorite play today at QB for 9,500.
Let me just roll over North Texas this year. 5-3, 8 games. Here are the team totals. 90. This is game total. 90, 55, 87, 61, 72, 78, 96, 82. Their lowest one was 55. This game's going over. I mean, the 65 and a half the total, they can't set this thing low enough. They've played 2 games in the 90s this year. It's going to – I know Army plays a little slower pace, so, we could see – and Army does have a very good defense. Don't get me wrong. I mean, but they've played some upwards games. They've been 45-28 against East Carolina recently. Army's D is – I mean, if you look at the metrics, you'd be like, no way. 3rd against the rush, 28th against the pass, but – when you play lesser teams like Lehigh, Temple, they're not going to get the attack that they're getting today with North Texas. So saying that, Joel, I'm with you on Daly, but I wouldn't count out Morris either. I mean, he's put up what? Let's look. His last 3 games, I know we're in the 40s, 40, 44, 33, 41. He consistently slings the rock 61 times, 57 times, last 2 times out, over 400 yards in both games. I think they're going to have to do the same. So I like Chandler Morris a lot too. I'm not a big pay up guy. I'm with you. But 9,400, 9,500, these two, I think we have a great chance. I think it'll be hard to play both. But there are some strategies that we've already thrown out some 4,000 guys where I may try a lineup or 2 where we play both.
I totally agree with you. This is if you're banking on this being that game environment, if this goes to a 90-point total, play both. Because that's the ceiling is just going to be so high. And listen, there's some spots in this game. Listen, Udo at running back, value running back, under 6K. You can play him too. Even if you look at these receivers, like Sheffield's the obvious play at 8K. He's the number 1 target. But, Carnes has been very involved at under 4K. He can be another value receiver you can plug in there. I like Damon Ward a lot today. He's had a few very explosive games as a secondary option. He certainly can be a GPP ceiling breaker as well in this passing attack. So there's some ways to save salary to make playing both work, especially if you think this is one of those kind of 40-something games that goes way over.
Yeah, looking at North Texas, they're the bottom 10 in all Division I in pass defense. They're bottom 30 in rush defense too. I think that's where Army will attack them. But if you want to take a shot on an Army receiver too, I mean, Casey Reynolds has been okay because he's had 3 touchdowns. Problem is they just don't pass a lot. So I think I'd stick with the Army running game, like you said, and attack from the North Texas passing game.
All right. Now, this game, Georgia Ole Miss, probably more interesting in real life than it is for DFS purposes. These are 2 very good games. I'm going to enjoy watching these 2 teams play. I'm not going to be overexposed for DFS. I'm not going to play a quarterback at 9,600 against Georgia, even though Georgia's defense isn't as great as it's been in years past. It's still good enough where there's better spots to target for that money. Carson Beck, I would say, is in play. This Ole Miss team does have a very strong run defense, so you almost want to funnel to the pass. Carson Beck might be the first pick in the NFL draft. He's certainly going to play on Sunday, so in an environment where he's forced to throw at 7,500. I actually think Carson Beck's a little bit underpriced. So Beck would be my preference in terms of targets in this game.
Yeah, I think Beck is a great GPP play. He's had 3 games over 30 points. He's had like 3 under 10. He is the definition of a guy you just want to roll the dice with. And at 7,500, like Joel said, I think he's a great price. And we're looking at an Ole Miss pass defense that's 91st in the nation, again, out of 133 teams. So you can beat them there. My only concern there, I just don't know where I'm going to go if I do want to pair him up. I mean, Arian Smith has been probably his best receiver, but they just spread the ball so much. I mean, Lovett was supposed to be a guy coming in this year. Bell's been good too. So it's just I wouldn't get too crazy with the stack here. I might, if they spread the ball out so much, Beck can win running naked. You're fine with that at 7,500. So just some strategies here. See where it fits in. All I'm saying is you don't have to force in a receiver, in my opinion, even if you're taking back at 7,500.
That's a really good point. I do find myself sometimes trying to force a receiver in with my quarterback, and you don't have to do that. You can just play your quarterback and go elsewhere at receivers. Don't feel like you need to force that every time.
Yeah.
All right, Kansas, Iowa State, another interesting spot. Especially interesting because Jalen Daniels, who was terrible to start the year, has been playing much better. And if you remember, it was now 2 years ago. Jalen Daniels was an absolute stud for DFS. He gets it done with his legs and with his arm. At 5,800, he is underpriced. This Iowa State defense is above average, but for a quarterback that gets it done with their legs, and this Iowa State defense has gotten beat on the ground by quarterbacks this year, that's the spot to attack. I think as my favorite value quarterback of the day is going to be Jalen Daniels at 5,800, getting it done with his legs and with his arm against this Iowa State defense, which is good, but you can beat them. Neal also in play. The one thing that's going to look funny with Iowa State is it shows that they're really bad against the run, but that's a little bit deceptive because they've gotten destroyed by 2 or 3 of the best running backs in the country. Other than that, they've been pretty good.
Yeah.
And so Devin Neal is up there as one of the better backs in the country. So I think, he could have a good game, but I don't think this is a bad run defense. I think this is a defense that just got beat by some really good players. My preference between the two is going to be Daniels over Neal. And then if you wanted to pair Daniels with a quarterback, Grimm would be the guy at 5,500. He's had a few big games, but this is a spot where you don't have to feel like you need to pair a receiver with Daniels.
No, I agree, and it's a great call on Daniels. This game is interesting at so many perspectives. Kansas started this year, just absolutely awful. And they found their way a little bit recently. Now this spread, you're looking at Iowa State team, I'm pretty sure was ranked going into last week, was one of the undefeated teams, and it's only a 2.5 point favorite today against a Kansas team that is, fighting for their nothing anymore. They can't even get to a bowl game. So at 2.5 points, this one kind of stands out to me. Yeah, Iowa State's still 17, lost their first last week. At 2-6, Kansas, 2.5 points, just 7-1 versus 2-6. This one smells to me, and it smells to me like Kansas is going to be in this game the whole time. So I love the call with Jalen Daniels, and I kind of like staying away from most everything else, maybe Grimm. But on the Iowa State side, here's been my thing with Iowa State. 1 week we get all juiced up. I see Carson Hansen getting busy 2 in a row, 27 and 21. And then last week he just gets 6 points against a team that he probably should have lit up a little bit in Texas Tech. And they gave the ball to Sama a little bit more last week. He got more carries. And so I don't know what to do here, but at 4,000 and 3,400, it's really interesting. If we could target and nail a guy on the Iowa State running side, Kansas is not very good against running backs. 103rd. I'm leaning Hansen. I think it was just got to a point last week that they got a little bit, out of their sorts against Texas Tech. Again, losing that game. I think they weren't under the way they wanted to. I'm going back to Hansen. He's the guy at the goal line I feel more too. At 4,000, we could have a big week.
I agree. There's some upside there. It's hard because they are going to split, right? It's not, both are going to be involved, but to your point, at only 4K or 3,400, they're so cheap that it doesn't take a huge day for them to get there. So if you're looking for a value running back, you got to kind of pick right. But I think one of those two could be a good play.
Yeah, and we're talking some high-end players that we talked about earlier. Finding that mix here, now we've identified like 4 running backs in that 4K or lower range could really help balance out because we got a couple other big ones coming up. But love your call on Jalen Daniels. I think this has some sneaky potential to be a good game to get involved in.
All right. Well, speaking of running backs, we're looking at Clemson, Virginia Tech. I think this is a big spot for Phil Moffitt here at Clemson. Yep. Virginia Tech run defense has been embarrassingly bad. You kind of want to target them weekly as much as you can. And, if there's a guy to target, it's Phil Moffitt. I just feel like they've underpriced him. I would have projected him to be maybe in the 8K range or high 7s. To get him at 6,500, it's too good of a price. So because there's a ton of ownership going to Wisner and Udo, Moffitt's still going to carry ownership, but it won't be as high as you would think because of those two other guys. So I love the spot here for Maffa this week. I will be overplaying Maffa in many spots. I'll definitely prefer Maffa to Klubnik. Klubnik's been unbelievable this year, but at 9,300, you get so much savings in the Maffa play. Another guy I definitely want on your radar, guy I'm going to be very overexposed to is Brian Wesco, the freshman receiver here at Clemson. He was hurt for a few weeks. He came back last week and had 12 targets. If you get a receiver getting 12 targets at 3,100, that's math doesn't make any sense. And, I would expect the ownership based on that to be closer to like 30, 40%. I'm only seeing 10%. That could be wrong. It might be higher than the 10 that's being projected. But if he only comes in at 10% at 3,100 with 12 targets last week, this will be my number one value play of the day.
Yeah, I love it. I had him circled, penciled, highlighted, everything you want to say. I think Wesco, we've been talking about it. I think Warren has chipped in sometimes. We're always looking at the Wesco radar. And what we mean by that is what's his injury status? Because we know his talent, and he missed so many games in the middle there, but he's had 3 games, double digits. And that's 3,100. He seems like he's the number 2 to Antonio Williams right now, getting more snaps than some of his other counterparts. Other guy always to keep an eye on, Brennan still at 4,000. He's had one of those, break the slate type games when he went back at Wake Forest and had that 26-point game. So another guy I think you could target here in the passing game if you decide to go that route. But Maffa, I agree. I mean, I still have Taylor as my number 1, but Maffa is my number 2. I mean, last week, 30 carries. Isn't that a beautiful thing? Some weeks we see him get 10, 12. I really think if they are going to get into the playoffs, which is going to be real tough with 2 losses now, even though one of them was to Georgia, that's what they're holding their foot on. They need to ride Maffa. So I like it.
All right. Maffa, it is. Then number 1 here, I really find this Michigan-Indiana game to be really intriguing. This is a game I'm going to want to watch this afternoon. I want to see if this Indiana team's for real. I think they are. I think Indiana's going to beat Michigan. Michigan is a funnel defense, right? They're very good against the run. You're definitely not – I'm not going to be playing the running attack against Michigan. But I think it opens up some possibilities through the air. And one thing to keep in mind, Michigan has an NFL cornerback. So I think the number 1 guy is not the guy to target, which is Surratt. I think one of these secondary receivers who are all cheap are going to have a game because they're just going to avoid the top corner. But the problem is there's 4 of them, that any of them could be the guy. So it's not an obvious spot. It's not like, it's definitely going to go to Price or Williams or Cross. That's the challenge, and you got to pick right. But if you want to take a shot on another value play, one of these secondary Indiana receivers, I think, could have a big game today.
If I asked you before the season, Michigan, Indiana, week 11, what's the spread?
I will tell you this. I would have said the spread was probably going to be 3 scores, but I do have a preseason bet on Indiana to make the playoff.
Yeah, there you go. Okay.
So I like them. I did like them for a long time.
Yeah, but it's 14.5 today, the other way, right? It's a tale of just a changing of the guard a little bit in the Big Ten. And Indiana, I think they got a little bit disrespected in the college football playoff rankings. I think they ended up right around 8-9 area. And then you look at Miami, undefeated as well, all the way up to 4. Miami's, I want to say, won 7 of their 8 as close games, and he has blown out everybody. And I take the Big Ten over the ACC any day of the week too. So anyway, I'm with you. I'm really impressed by Indiana. I do think they pull away today. Tough spot for DFS in my opinion. At only 48.5. It actually comes in as the second lowest game behind UF and Texas. So I don't know how much I want to get involved, but Michigan's pass D is the one area to attack. 95th in the country in pass defense at 235.8 per game. I saw Jackson light him up from Minnesota. I think Surratt can still get there if you move him around. I'm with you. I think they're going to spread it around so much that we just might not be able to get that real high point performer. But if I take a chance, it would be on an Indiana receiver. I'm not going to get in their passing game from a quarterback perspective. But like Rourke, I know some people do like him, but I'll tend to get involved in the passing game.
I'm with you on that. The other thing I'll add is Michigan's tight end has been their best player all year. And more recently, they've really featured him at 4,800. This Indiana defense is good. This isn't like an obvious attack spot, but 4,800 is pretty cheap for a guy who is the featured player on this offense. So I think Loveland's in play. I'll have a little exposure to him as well.
Yeah, agreed. All right, man. We got the big one. Saving it for last.
And now, save the best for last. Texas Tech, Colorado. As Dave mentioned earlier, it's almost a laughably obvious spot. Texas Tech, probably the worst pass defense in the country. All Colorado can do is throw. It just seems like, almost too obvious. And finally, for the first time all year, Shedeur Sanders' price has come down, where he's playable, where he wasn't playable all year at 9,600, 9,800, now at 8,900. You can play him in the best spot of the year. So really interesting spot here with Shedeur. The interesting part is Travis Hunter's obvious. He's 9,500. So you got to pay up. But it's hard to find a better spot for Hunter. They throw to him every single time. This Texas Tech defense has no answers for him. He's going to have a good game. The problem is if he doesn't get over 30, it's just not worth the price tag. And almost 30 is almost just enough, right? He needs to have a monster game to pay off. But a good game is coming. So the floor is so high with Travis Hunter that it's worth getting some exposure to. And the next thing I'm trying to find is there a second receiver in this offense you can play? You don't have to, but all three of these guys are in play between Wester, Horn, and Shepard. Wester being the best. I prefer Shepard between Horn and Shepard, but it's, at that point it's a coin flip which guy will get the most exposure in this offense.
Yeah, it's just a great spot, right? For DFS, and don't think twice. Right? And I'll give you a couple lessons. Last night, Wake Forest, one of the worst pass defenses in the league, just like Texas Tech. Mendoza throws for a huge game, is the best quarterback on the board for Cal. Last week, Rocco Becht, it hasn't gone for more than 250 all year, goes 299, almost 300 against Texas Tech. Had its best game of the season, even though they lost, had his best passing yards of the season. Colorado is going to have a big day, and it's going to be behind Shedeur Sanders at 8,900. He's a top 2-3 quarterback. For me, I don't want to go I'm not going to tell him going 60%. I might not even get to 50% ownership, but I am going to play a lot of Sanders. The other one I do like, this running back out of Colorado, Isaiah Augustave, I should say, has 3 straight games, decent games, but more importantly, 3 straight games where he scored touchdowns. He seems like a changing of the guard there. Texas Tech is very bad against the run as well. As they're bad against the pass, they're bad against the run too. Get a couple passes way down into deep in the red zone. He could steal a touchdown or two at 3,900. I'm not scared to play him with the passing game of Colorado at 3,900. I still think you could pair him up with, Hunter, Sanders, and you have a really good triumvirate of Colorado. So on the other side, one of our favorites, week in, week out, Taj Brooks. I think he's going to get a ton of the carries. Colorado, not very good defensively. They're okay, right? They've gotten a little better, but you can still take advantage of them. 79th against the run and 151st against running backs. So Taj Brooks, my favorite on Texas Tech.
Yeah, Taj Brooks in play every week. 8,400, certainly a fair price, especially if you're going for game environment here. Taj Brooks could be in store for a big day. But I will say this Colorado defense has improved. They aren't as bad as we kind of think they are in their head. That doesn't mean that they're great and they're going to stop them, but it just means they're a little bit better than they had been previously. So still a great spot, though. I definitely want to get some exposure to this game environment any way you can in your lineups.
Yeah, and Morton's a guy I wouldn't fade away from, the quarterback there. And Kelly's been great all year, only 6K, averaging 20. And to Jalen's point here, we talked about Antoine Raymond earlier at 3,400 for Rutgers, getting to see the majority of the carries. This does allow you to pay up for those guys like Hunter, Sanders, and Brooks potentially. We also talked about 4K guys in some other areas over there in Iowa State with Hanson. So there is some ability to pay up for this game if you want and really get all the stars.
There you have it. All right. Before we get you out of here today, we do want to drop our Underdog plays. Some great over-under plays you can get on Underdog today. If you really have a high level of confidence in some of these DFS plays, go make the bet over on Underdog. Dave, who are you targeting here?
Yeah, we talked about a lot of great places we can land today. And one of the things it's tough for me in New Jersey. I know, Joel, you're in Jersey too as well. So I can't really bet on Rutgers as much as I'd like, but I can go against them on Underdog. And I'm looking straight at Darius Taylor over 105.5 rushing yards. It just, if Minnesota does anything, it's a beautiful day out here, right? A little crispier, but a great environment for football. Weather's not a concern. I think Darius Taylor has a huge day, over 105.5 rushing yards is my first play on Underdog.
I like that play as well. Rutgers can't stop a nosebleed. He's the go-to guy. I think he's going to do what he wants. I'm tailing you with Taylor. I'm going to start with the obvious spot, the one we were talking about. I'm going to this Colorado team. Travis Hunter is the best receiver in the country. Texas Tech is the worst passer for the country. They get Hunter the ball as much as they possibly can. The only way I see this one losing is if Hunter gets hurt. If he stays healthy, I think he surpasses 102 yards receiving easily. So give me the over on 102.5 receiving for Travis Hunter.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think, he's got some motivation as well. Some people don't give him a lot of credit for, being a top 5 receiver or D-back. Every week he's trying to go out there and prove he is. And I do think he is on both sides. I just don't know if he'll translate in the NFL, but in college, he definitely is a top 5 receiver and D-back. I flipped a few times on this last one, and I wasn't sure exactly where I'd go, but I'm going to stick with the running backs. And if there's one thing we've done consistently over the 2-3 years we've been doing this, Joel, is we have attacked Virginia Tech. And I'm going to attack them again with Maffa. Those 30 carries last week give me a lot of, good feeling that they're going to go back to him early and often. I'll go over his rushing yards as well at 96.5. He's done it, I think, 5 times this year already. So give him a 6. Maffa over 96.5 rushing yards.
I'm laughing because that was my next play as well. I was going to say the exact same thing. I agree with you. Obviously, Maffa, this Virginia Tech run defense is not good. This seems like a big spot for Maffa. Because of that, I'm lying. I'm going to change my second pick here. I'm going to go with the guy, one of my favorite plays of the day. Do they not have him on here? I don't know. Can't find him. I wanted to say Army's quarterback.
Yeah, I couldn't find that. Game's not on here either.
The game's not on here. So if you can't find him on here, I'll shift again to a new spot. And I just want to stick. If that game's not on there, you got to think of something different. Well, I'll pause back to you, Dave. You got any other plays?
I'll throw one other one up there. Riley Leonard's going to have a big night. Florida State is one of the biggest embarrassments in the history of college football. So over a half rushing touchdown for Riley Leonard, no problem. He's punching at least one in. That's a 7:30 game later. I do think Notre Dame's going to win that one. I mean, the spread's almost 4 touchdowns. Riley Leonard's getting at least one running.
There you have it. And that's what this offense does. It runs through Leonard. So I agree with that one. That's a good play. Any other words of wisdom for today, Dave, before we get everyone out of here?
Yeah, I'm betting Kansas. I told you that spread sounds silly to me. Iowa State coming off their first loss this season. Heartbreaking, too, by 1 to Iowa State. They're Iowa State to Texas Tech. I just think there's something in the tea leaves there that I'm going to lean that way. I will say there's a lot of good games from a DFS perspective, and I think this is going to be a spread out slate. As much as we have 3 games over 60 and you want a game stack, I'll game stack. Don't get me wrong, here and there. I probably won't get more than 3 in a game just because there's so much value spread out across this whole slate. I've seen too many DFS cards where, that 1 week you get that full game stack and you remember it and you say, that's always got to happen. I go back to Lions Seahawks last year. Yeah. But more than likely, you're going to have to pick and choose from several games here. So don't get too, even though I'm in love with this Colorado game, don't get too overloaded. Don't get more than 3 or 4. Spread it out.
There you have it. The word of advice I'll leave you is I really think this Army team is getting slept on. They can move the ball. That North Texas defense is bad. Dave, you mentioned it earlier in the show. You read over all those over-unders. I think the number today is like 65, and I still think that's low. Take the over. That game is going to have explosive points. Get them in your DFS lineups. Get exposure to that game. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm going over. I think we see a ton of fireworks in the North Texas Army game. It's going to be a fun Saturday. Let's make some money. Show us those green screens as they come in. Good luck this week, and we'll see you next week.